Welcome back to the Wildfires, the podcast where we talk about the people side of MSP growth without the fluff. Because hiring pressure has a funny way of creeping up on you. A role stays open, the team is stretched, service starts to feel heavier, and before you know it, what felt manageable suddenly feels urgent. And that is when fast hiring starts to look well attractive. It feels decisive, it feels proactive, it feels like the right thing to do. But here is the truth. Moving quickly without clarity is not smart hiring. It's just faster risk. Because in an MSP, one rushed hire does not just affect one role. It affects team morale, delivery, client experience, and, leadership bandwidth. It's a bit like patching over a system issue without checking the root cause. You might get a short-term relief from it, but the problem often comes back bigger later. That is why today's episode matters. I'm joined by the amazing Pippa, who helps growing MSPs get serious about their people, whether it's building stronger teams, navigating people challenges, or helping leaders develop with more confidence. She brings practical insight that actually makes a difference. So, Pippa, welcome, and tell the listeners a little bit about yourself.
Hello, Jane. Thanks for having me. So I am founder of Strength in People, and within that role, I am a strengths coach. I'm a business advisor, and I work closely with leadership teams, management teams, and individuals within business, helping people be their best selves at work. Alongside that, I work very closely with Wildcat, and I'm their people expert, if you like, and cover all things people for them. So multiple roles going on and a lot of fun.
Indeed, absolutely. Wear many a hat. And today we're going to talk about how MSP leaders can hire quickly without, tipping into panic. So if you've ever felt the pressure to just get someone in, this one is for you. So let's get into it, Pippa. So I'm going to start off by going, why do you think MSP leaders so often feel pressure to hire quickly when their teams are stretched, and what is really driving that urgency?
Often, Jane, it's a combination of a number of things. It's often a lack of balance between foresight and people management, because what I commonly see, especially in MSPs, there's so much focus on the day-to-day, getting the job done, servicing the tickets, getting through this day. And what often happens with leadership teams is they get drawn down into that area of the business. And that means that there isn't anybody there who's focusing on the strategy, on the next steps, on the succession planning, on the growth, on being ready for when that next thing hits. And that's partly, yes, about growth and about future planning, but it's also about being ready for the unexpected. We talk a lot about quiet quitting. We talk a lot about those people that it's a surprise when they hand their notice in. And honestly, in 99 cases out of 100, it shouldn't be a surprise, because we see people change before they hand in their notice. People don't just wake up in the morning and decide that's what they're going to do. There will have been a build-up. And what happens is leadership and management teams get so tied up in getting through the day that they're not focused on the bigger picture. And then the right things stop happening, or they might not have been happening in the first place. And by right things, I'm thinking about keeping an eye on your people, staying close to them, understanding how they're doing, how they're coping, understanding their wants and needs and plans for the future, and how that matches or maybe doesn't match with where the business needs to go. So it's very much a people problem, but it's driven by a leadership issue commonly, because the leadership is tied up in the day-to-day, in the weeds, and not able to take on that bigger picture.
Absolutely bogged down and not paying attention, or maybe doing the blinker thing and trying not to see it.
Get through the day.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very reactive environment. So once they get dragged into the weeds, like you say, then they're not going to see the bigger picture. And yeah, absolutely. So how do you have...
Well, I was just going to say, in many ways, that reactive environment is the key thing, because people grow up through MSPs and their job is to react. Once you get into leadership in an MSP in any organisation, that's not the space to be in. But when you spent your entire working career working your way through that culture, it's very difficult to make that shift. So it's it's almost like you carry on doing what you're best at, which is reacting. And that's not necessarily, as you get into leadership and management, that's not necessarily what's best for the team or for the business.
Absolutely. That's a huge mindset change as well, isn't it? And to make yourself stand back and make them stand back from the business, and know that it's not going to stop. The wheels aren't going to fall off. It'll still be there in the morning. It's that thing, but it's letting go of their baby as well. That makes it quite difficult, doesn't it? So how do you help leaders spot the difference between what I call genuine urgency and panic when they're making people decisions?
That's an interesting one because most leaders don't see the difference between the two.
Exactly.
You won't find leaders who want to go into life in a panic or into their environment, the working environment in a panic. But what happens is that sense of urgency is what they react to. So it's how people deal with the urgency when there isn't already a plan in place.
Yeah.
So it's not having that foresight. It's not having those ready steps to go through when this happens that puts leaders on the back foot. And then it's very easy to slip into filling a position versus finding the right hire. And of course, as you mentioned in your intro, as long as that hire isn't in place, everybody around that role is stretched. So leaders will have their strengths in different areas. You might find, for example, somebody who is very much relationship based will make a panic hire because they want to make things okay for the team, because they want to take the pressure off the people around them. Yeah, make it okay for everybody else. You'll find other leaders who have real strengths in the areas of execution, of getting things done. They want that team member in quickly so that things get done more quickly.
Yeah.
So that panic can come from different places depending on the leader. And so understanding yourself when you're in that position and what is likely to make you want to jump quickly rather than make a smart hire. That's the trick there. It's understanding yourself. It's self-awareness. It's self-leadership in that moment.
Yeah, and I think that's where what you do, which is strengths coaching, which is fantastic. You've done me. None of it was a surprise, but it all makes sense. And once you understand yourself, then you can stop yourself or recognize that you're about to do something, or you're doing something that actually is going to perhaps not jeopardize, but also not be the right thing to do. And you can then make yourself stop and step back and go, actually, what should I do? And reflect, rather than, for me, it's like action, isn't it? And I have to stop myself. And also, when I come up with ideas or things, I have to go through a process now, rather than just going, this is what we're doing. And I don't know how I'm going to do it, but let's crack on. So
Absolutely.
Everybody different. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. And that's the key to it. It's not that there's a book that you can go out and read and say, right, this is how I lead an MSP. It's much more about how well do I understand myself? And self-awareness is common. People are self-aware. What is less common is what people do with that knowledge.
Yeah.
And so it's making that link between what am I aware of in myself, and how is that likely to make me react? And therefore, how am I most likely to cause myself a problem? Once we start to make those connections, the self-awareness moves through into self-leadership, because we start to make choices about whether we want to take that route or not, versus just being me. And on some days, just being me is going to be fantastic, and it's going to work. On other days, I'm going to get in my own way, and I'm going to cause myself and my business problems.
Exactly that. Absolutely. Spot on. And in your experience, what behavioural signs do MSP leaders most commonly miss in interviews? And what could that actually tell them about a long-term fit that they've missed?
Interesting. Leadership in interviews is always a fascinating thing, because it's a very human and natural thing to seek people out that are like us. And so that self-awareness comes in. What does that mean? And it might be that having more people like us is what the business needs. On the other hand, it might be that that's what's going to stop the business moving forward. Yeah. So there's now levels of awareness, yes, of myself, but also of the rest of the team, and what that impact is likely to be of whoever you bring in. Yeah. So getting to understand what we go through as an interviewer in an interview, is really helpful, and
Mm-hmm.
how that affects our decision making. And
Yeah.
also understanding how best to draw out of the person that's sitting in front of you what they bring and what sort of talents, not just their technical skills, but their
Exactly.
approaches, their behaviors, how they do what they do.
Yeah.
Getting to the bottom of that in an interview is then really key, because once you've got that information, or those two pieces of information, you start to be able to see, well, okay, somebody might be coming in who might be a bit different.
Yeah.
Is that different going to be helpful to us? And how are we
Mm-hmm.
going to support it when it comes in?
Yeah.
And that's a key thing to look for, because commonly groups of very similar people don't create flourishing businesses. So we need to look for that diversity. We need to look for for how people are different, but also what does that mean for the team?
Mm.
Because you then need to support everybody in how they work best together.
Yeah.
So there's so many layers to that. We could talk all day.
We could. We could. We often do, Pippa. We often do, which is excellent. I absolutely love it. So a lot of people think behavioural insight slows the process down. How can understanding strengths and behaviour actually help leaders hire faster and with more confidence?
The aim certainly with a strengths-based approach,
Mm.
is to use it to help you refine your interview questions. So strengths-based assessment won't tell you whether this person can do the job. What it will tell you is how they will best thrive. And so what you're looking for is that something that's going to fit in our environment, enhance our environment, and help us move forward? So the strengths-based assessment is a lot about understanding how to draw out the best of somebody.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So we're not looking to put somebody in a box to say, you are this person, therefore you'll behave in this way. It's
Yeah.
much more about understanding the nuances of the people in
Mm,
front of us.
mm,
Really getting to know somebody takes 6 months. And so you need that time. But what any behavioral assessment can do in an
mhm.
interview is help you accelerate that process of getting to know somebody. So what you're looking to do is to make your best choice in that moment. And it doesn't slow things down when you make it part of your interview process on a routine basis.
Yeah.
It actually helps you move faster, because in your interviews, you actually structure the question in a far more productive way. And so you get
Yeah.
to the information you need much more quickly. So
Absolutely.
it accelerates the process versus slowing it down.
Yeah, and it doesn't these uniform interviews, yes, we all need a benchmark, but if you're looking at different people and different characteristics, then you need to have a more, what's the word, a more detailed approach to how you're doing what you're doing, and that's what it gives you, absolutely. Okay, great. So what are the biggest risks of making a hiring decision based mainly on technical ability and capability, especially in a lovely MSP environment?
Well, this is something for MSPs in particular, which is that we always look at what are somebody's technical skills. And don't get me wrong, yes, that's important. But way beyond that is how they do what they do.
Mm-hmm.
Because having somebody who is brilliant at their job within a team
Yeah.
might work very well as long as they're able to connect in the right way with the team. Of course, what that looks like depends on the MSP. So again,
Mhm.
there isn't a textbook answer to say all MSPs need this, because all MSP businesses are different.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of looking at what is the environment that you're creating, how can
Mhm.
you best support people, and from that you start to understand the how people do what they technically do, and
Mm.
what's important for that in your MSP. And so I always love it when I see MSP, leaderships of MSPs networking,
Yeah.
because there's always this lovely environment where people talk about, how they're getting on, all those sorts of things. And I often see actually there's a good balance between that and remembering that my business is unique,
Yes. Yes.
because
That's very
so
true.
many of them are based around owner managers. And so
Yeah.
you have this sort of the personality of the leadership is within
Yeah.
the business. And that's
Yeah.
where the uniqueness comes from. Understanding that balance between, well, what's everybody else doing and what do I need to do is a really good thing. And I often see that within MSPs that conversation is happening.
Yeah, it's an interesting one that you bring that up because yeah, when I go networking with MSPs, it's so true. They're all very individual. Their businesses are very individual, and yeah, and they know that. And I think that's super important. That just needs to translate when they do the hiring side. We'll get there with them. Not that I'm very good at it. I'm not poo-pooing it, but at the end of the day, nobody gets taught how to hire someone. Nobody gets taught how to interview somebody. We're all sort of, people are just muddling through, hoping that they're doing it the right way. And that's what we're here to help to show them the way.
Yeah,
Because
and a key part of it, of course, is leadership of MSPs are all human.
yeah,
We're all human, and we're all in this same position of trying to figure out how to work best with other humans. At its
yeah.
very base level, that's our starting point.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So MSP leaders, well, they often trust their gut and rightly so. But how do you balance what I call basic, instinct? To realize what I've done there with more structured people data so decisions can feel both human and also robust.
Again, it's about finding a balance. It's about understanding, and I think this is something that grows as an MSP grows,
Yeah.
because often we start off with 2 or 3 people and, and we're a family here.
Yeah.
I have to be honest, I know a lot of dysfunctional
Me
families, but,
too.
there's still that sense of, we'll keep that family vibe going. As an organization grows, a leader needs to start to understand that the culture is driven by them, but it's multiplied by the people around them. And so figuring that out on what they want the culture to be it can then be a turning point for an MSP, because as they grow, they need to start to, yes, lead with their gut and
Mhm.
make their decisions, and at the same time take into account the people around them. And that's where the balance comes. And that's what can often slow or stall growth,
Mm.
is the ability to make that transition, to be able to let go a little bit, to be able to take into account the people around them, to take their views into account,
Yeah.
to not run by committee, but to start to get a feeling for what's best for the group versus the one person. And that transition can be a real challenge.
Yeah, and there's loads of different transitions as they go through, and culture, changes as they grow. Some are better at that transition, others fight it quite a bit. But I love dealing with companies, MSPs, when they're actually going through those transitions, because it's a very interesting time indeed. So, for MSP leaders who are listening, who want to improve hiring clarity without making the process feel heavy or complicated, where should they start?
First off is always clarity on the role. When I talk about the role, I'm thinking about the whole of the role, not just what technically needs to be done, but how does it need to be done? Where does it fit in the team structure? What do we think are the potential longer term impacts for this role? So having that clarity and being ready to have that conversation in an interview. The hiring market is a really interesting one at the moment, and
Absolutely.
all business owners and anybody who's interviewing needs to understand that the interviewing, I think now more than ever, is a two-way street. They not only need to select the best hire for the role, but they also need to be able to encourage that person to want to join the business.
Exactly.
Much bigger picture thing. Yes, it's partly done in interview, but it's also a lot about everything else that surrounds the business, internal communications, the external communications, how the business behaves.
Mm.
It's making sure that what happens in that interview is congruent with the whole business. And what I see a lot at the moment, especially in MSPs, is a drive and a need for change, in as much as, because they're looking to grow, they're looking to adapt, they're looking to shift how they are. So being deliberate about what that means for the culture, and
Mm.
therefore what they bring out in interview, how they present themselves as a business, creating that as a whole picture versus thinking about going into an interview with a bunch of questions and expecting a bunch of answers so you can pick the right person. It's much more a bigger picture thing
Yeah.
than that. And so we come back to the leaders who have this easy are the ones who are able to step out of the weeds and have a clear view of what that picture is, therefore a clear view of what the role and the personality and what that person needs to bring to that role is. And therefore they stand a much better chance of seeing it when it's in front of them, or recognizing what shifts need to be made in order to achieve it. So it all starts with that clarity. With that, keeping the process effective and efficient, because people don't want to be hanging around. There's finding that balance between having enough stages in your interview process to be able to get what you both need from it, but also to keep it moving. And a key thing around that is communication. So communication throughout the process. And so, it's about the clarity of the role, the clarity of the process, and then making that process work.
Absolutely. And it's very much gone back to being a candidate driven market. You know, there's happening all the time, and I'm seeing all the time. It's because companies aren't necessarily moving yet as fast because they haven't got the clarity, they haven't got the decision process. They're losing people because they're already being offered roles. The process needs to be defined to have the clarity, then to move fast to make sure that they get the good people rather than not necessarily the best, but the ones that are left, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So a lot of that going on again. So what a
Yes.
conversation, because this is the bit so many MSP leaders miss. Hiring quickly is not the problem. Hiring blindly is. When pressure builds, it is easy to focus on short-term relief. You know, you need someone in, the team needs support, like we're talking about, and clients still need looking after. But rushed hiring has a habit of handing you a bigger problem later. Because in an MSP, the wrong hire does not just affect one desk. It affects your team, your delivery, your clients, and your culture. A huge thank you to Pippa for joining me and sharing such practical insight as always. If this episode made you think differently about how you hire, send it to someone in your team who, probably needs to hear it. Until next time, hire with clarity, lead with confidence, and as always, stay wild.